In this thesis, I am going to analyze the main themes of the musical My Fair Lady: education, language acquisition, and language-culture combination, emphasizing the importance of the experience for the language acquisition. My Fair Lady is a musical directed by George Cukor of 1964. This film is based on the stage play Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. It begins with a challenge: turning a florist into a lady by teaching her all the English phonemes. In the musical, the connection between language and culture is underlined as if they were both integral parts of the person. The main themes are the education and the language acquisition. In fact, Eliza learns a new language in 6 months. So I ask myself, could it be possible? Is the phonetics the most important thing to study? And above all, are 6 months enough to study a language? The story of Eliza and Professor Higgins is based on the Greek myth of Pygmalion and Galatea by Ovid. In this story, an ivory statue is transformed into a woman of flesh and blood. Pygmalion, in fact, is in love with his statue, but he finds full satisfaction transforming it into a human being. This metamorphosis is a clear metaphor of the transformation of an educated human being, like a statue, into a perfect educated man. In fact, the central theme is the education. As in the Greek myth, Pygmalion creates his statue, which represents his perfect woman stereotype, so in the musical, Professor Higgins transforms a flower girl into a lady. So the impossible becomes possible. The term education comes from the Latin verb educere, which means take out. In fact, the education role is to take out something that is already in the human being. The role of the educator is essential for the education. He is a guide, and he contributes to the personal growth of the scholar. He also has to spend much time with the scholar, sharing all the important moments to understand better which are his attitudes and his interests in order to find the best way to educate him. As we have already said, each scholar needs his own way, which is different from all the others. Many authors over the centuries have developed their own theory about education. The most important is certainly Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who in the 18th century spoke about the education as a means to change society in his most important work, Emile or On Education. In this work, he proposed a new method of education of the child, which has to be led by an educator. An important element in Rousseau's method is the time. In fact, the education lasts until almost adulthood. This underlines its importance. Furthermore, education, as Rousseau states, cannot be acquired with notions or explanations, but it is something you learn by living and making mistakes. And this introduces to the concept of experience, which is reclaimed by Dewey in the 20th century. Also, according to Dewey, experience plays a key role in the education because the man is not a passive spectator, but interacts with the environment around him. The word experience comes from the Latin verb experiti, that means going through. It is a kind of knowledge that is not learned through the mind, but through the sense. In fact, he said that without experience there is no education. But if experience is necessary for education in general, the same goes for language education. In fact, the phonetic is just one of the elements of the language. Studies carried out by the German anthropologist Franz Boas show how each language is determined by the culture of the country where it is spoken. This combination is essential. In fact, you cannot learn a language without knowing the culture. We are influenced by the culture since the early years of our life, and it is something that we carry with us forever. It is an unconscious mechanism, as it is part of the human being itself. When we learn a language, it is also necessary come into contact with the culture of the country where the language is spoken. In this case, we speak about acculturation, that is the process of appropriation of another culture and another language. The only way to reach an acculturation, to learn better the language, is through the experience. We cannot imagine to know a culture or study a language without the experience. Moreover, the language by its nature is communication. It finds its raison d'être in the relationship between individuals. In fact, when we study a language, it is always for the desire to communicate and thus to create connection with someone else. Therefore, it is necessary that the theoretical study is expanded by experience. I personally experienced it during my stay in Vienna, capital of Austria. During these 2 months, I have encountered many difficulties because of my completely different cultural background. But once passed, I realized how much the language is really linked to the culture of the place. In Austria, for example, they greet usually with the formula Grüß Gott, which literally means that God can say goodbye, rather than simply Guten Tag, good morning, used in Germany. This is because, as they explain me, in Austria the religion, especially Catholicism, is more rooted than in Germany. This is just one of the many examples that can be done to show how the language is actually influenced by the culture of people who speaks it. And the only way to truly understand it is to travel and live experience personally. In conclusion, we can affirm that learning a language only through a theoretical study is impossible, because a language is deeply linked to a culture and to an history, so experience plays a key role, since only through it we can truly understand the language. That's why what happens in the film is just an ideal.